J. Paul for the win. That's right. Okay. Everyone, we are here for a workshop called Fundraising Fundamentals. I've also called it Fundraising Unlocked. I see a lot of names that might be from LATAM, Brazil, Mexico. If you guys are part of the Latitude program, this is going to look very familiar. I encourage you guys to stay here till the end because we've allocated enough time where there will be a Q&A in case anyone has new questions after seeing this. But this is definitely designed to be your introduction to fundraising and for me to help put you on a better path than most founders are when they're not exposed to fundraising or venture capital when they haven't done this before. So I'm going to come off screen share in a second, but to get the housekeeping portion of this going, a few things. Let's make sure that you all have your cameras on. As I go through this program and this workshop, you'll see that it's super interactive. I like talking to people. I like seeing the way their faces react to what I have to say. If you're nodding along, I kind of understand that maybe what I'm saying is helping. And if you're furrowing your brow, I'll know that I'm really screwing up. So that kind of feedback can be super helpful. The Zoom chat is open. Feel free to interact. Some of the best connections have happened in our chat, which we're very proud of. So feel free to throw things in there. Also throw questions in there. My team is reviewing it just in case there's something that we have to react to. And then if anything feels good, sounds good, helps you in any way, feel free to share this on social. There's nothing here that we're trying to hide or make limited to just the people here. So feel free to share anything that's helpful. And then the last thing, which is super important, is that all of my workshops, all of my teaching is super interactive, meaning I will ask for volunteers. And if I don't get volunteers, I'll do what is called a cold call. So I'm not shy about calling on people if I need to prove a point or if I need someone to interact with me and no one's volunteering, I will cold call people. So I want to start the interaction early and easy and just ask everyone, where is everyone calling in from? If you could throw it in the chat, I'd love to see that and kind of understand what the program is looking at. LA, Brazil, the bone, a couple LAs, Canadians. Okay. Carlton from Illinois. Oh, multiple people from Toronto. Okay, like we usually see, pretty international crew, which is great. Luckily, the language of fundraising is pretty international, pretty consistent. Second question, kind of running out of shows. I just got done with Beef, which is an amazing show. What is everyone watching nowadays? I think this is really important. I usually ask this question for all entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs tend to go a little too hard and don't know how to relax. So what are the shows that we should be watching? Oh, wow. The Diplomat twice. The last thing he told me on Apple TV. NBA playoffs is good. Okay, there are some things that I haven't seen before. Great. Thank you for sharing your insights. Hopefully people have gotten relaxed and are ready to engage. This has been done across 3 different sessions in the past. We're going to try to jam it into a 90-minute session with Q&A at the end. But I'm ready to go and excited to get back into this. So sharing screen again. Before I get into this, let me tell you a little bit about my background if you haven't met me before. This is important for a couple reasons. And the least of which is I'm not trying to credential myself. So my background is that I worked at MLB.com, which is Major League Baseball's digital media company. By the end, I was the head of new media products there, and then became a venture capitalist. So I was a venture capitalist at a firm called Graycroft. Did that for about 4 or 5 years before jumping into startups. The last company I was co-founder and CEO of was a company called Tape. We raised a couple $1 million from Greylock up north. Had a small exit in 2020 and then shifted into this line of work. There's a little bit of a yada, yada, yada in there, but shifted over to this kind of not planning to do it, but became Silicon Valley Bank's internal fundraising coach before launching Adamant, which is this company where we are dedicated to making fundraising easier and more accessible to as many founders as possible. And we try to do that in a variety of different ways, including a ton of free content and workshops like this, also podcasts, newsletters, etc. So why do I give you that background? Well, it is not meant, like I said, to credential myself necessarily. I'm not trying to show you anything about myself other than context. Context is incredibly important when it comes to any advice, I think, in this world, but especially in fundraising. And I give this little preamble to every workshop I do just to make sure that when founders go out in the world and they're looking for help online, essays, Twitter posts, tweets that go out, LinkedIn, etc. There's a lot of value out there, but context is super important. And so whether it's this workshop or any other content you see from me or other people, just make sure you double click and go in and try to understand the context so that you can better understand how it applies to you. Now, this is important, and the way I illustrate this is with this example. If you've been through my workshop before, you'll notice this. I always bring this up. So this is a great example of this idea of context is really important. These are two investors that I know that I respect. One is Andrea Funston from Basecamp Ventures, and the other is Mark Suster from Upfront. And they're talking about the concept of data rooms and when data rooms should be shared with investors. On the left, Andrea essentially says, you know what, the best thing to see as an investor when I'm talking to a founder is when a founder jumps in and sends me their data room before I've even really engaged. Like, I want to see it immediately, essentially. And Mark Suster writes a full essay on why founders should never send a data room, which is kind of crazy. They're both successful venture capitalists. Why would they have such different pieces of advice? And it turns out if you got them together, I think, and had them break bread, talk about this, they would probably agree on most of the first principles thinking about when data rooms should be shared and why. It's just the way that the advice gets shared as a soundbite within a blog post or a tweet. And so for everyone, realize that whatever you're consuming as pieces of advice, you should be thinking about them like, okay, this is a soundbite. What does this mean? What's the context for which they created this piece of advice, and how does it actually apply to me? There's so much critical thinking associated with fundraising and startups. And if you're new to the founder game too, just being a founder, you're constantly going to be inundated with pieces of advice about how you should run your business. And at the end of the day, the only person that can run your business and make decisions is you. So you got to be really great about double clicking into any piece of advice. Okay. So let's go into the core of the workshop, and where we'll start is a simple question. I have a slide for this. I don't need to go to it, but question is really, what do you guys think fundraising is? Like, when I ask the question, what is fundraising? How would you answer that? And this is not a trick question. This is meant to tease out some of the different ideas around what people think fundraising is. So I'd love to take a volunteer. If someone wants to chat with me, the thing I'll say is that anyone that volunteers and talks to me will likely get the most out of these workshops. And like I said, in a few seconds, I'll be happy to call on the person who has the most standout background, Alex. Alex from Dandelion would love to just talk to you a little bit about what you think fundraising is.
Yeah, for us, there's sales, which is when you're driving revenue. And for us, fundraising is a lot more about how I am selling the principal return on the company, which means I am selling securities, I am selling the vision. I'm not selling the product, but the product is the company. So those kind of go hand in glove.
Right. I use some of this verbiage. You're selling the opportunity to invest, right? You're selling equity in the company. So that's definitely a part of it. And by the way, where are you calling in from?
We're based in Toronto.
Oh, very cool. One of the Canadian companies. Love it. Very good. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Anything that Alex didn't say you'd want to share? Abelardo. Oh, Nico.
Yeah, thank you. For us, it's a process. It's a process to raise capital in order to pursue our dreams, where we connect with someone with the same vision and get on board on our ship.
Love it. Nico, where are you calling it from?
I'm currently in Chile, in Latin America.
Very good. If anyone knows me, certainly my team, but other people that have gone through the programs, the word that you use is process is like music to my ears. Process is super important. Okay, so these are two great thoughts. The thing that I'll say that usually, and you guys are a little bit closer to my answer than I usually get, is that people do think about it like it's sales. And even the answer around process, I want to make sure we modify and make sure that you have the subtlety to this, because both of them could be oriented in a way where you're like, if I'm selling, then I'm like chasing down these leads and I'm like finding them and I'm selling them and I'm like trying to grab them and capture this money that's out there, really close them. And even the process, if not allocated or focused correctly, could be thought of, or what's the process to like almost like trick somebody into giving you money. And because a lot of times what I'll tell people is fundraising is not about tricking people into giving you money. And if you study it hard enough, like if you study the stuff that I do, some of the other people in this space, you'll learn a lot about investor psychology. And you actually might be able to convince people to give you money, even though, maybe it's not the best time to be taking money, or maybe you shouldn't be getting money. And I'll tell you this, being able to convince people to give you money when you're not ready or it's not a good fit for you is actually a terrible outcome. Fundraising shouldn't happen if you're not worth it. And I would really protect against this for yourselves as well, because the moment you take on other people's money, if you're not ready for it, you're in for a world of hurt. Running a venture-backed company is not like a cakewalk. All of a sudden you are on a treadmill. You're on a treadmill where someone essentially has a gun to your head to keep going, like go harder, go harder, go harder. And the only people that should be doing that are the ones that are ready for that. So that's the first thing I'll say about what fundraising is. The second thing is just my description of it is more fundraising is, sometimes I'll use process, but fundraising is essentially demonstrating that you are a great investment opportunity. And then it's all the work that you do to have investors discover that. So there's subtlety in the words that I'm using because of this concept that I have around chase or be chased. What we want to make sure you all understand around the best fundraisers is that the best fundraisers happen on the right side of this image, not on the left. You may be running a process, you may be running, fundraising is a close cousin to sales, but because of a lot of the things that we'll talk about in the rest of this workshop, it's got to be done in a way that feels like the right, that you're creating a situation where you are being chased because of how unscientific this whole thing is. Okay. So if there's nothing that you take away from this workshop, the idea of chase or be chased, and shifting your mindset to being chased will be a win if you walk away with that. So there are 4 categories that I like talking about for any program that I run, any workshop, and we're going to touch on each of these to, again, like I said, try to push you in the right direction, shift your orientation in a better way so that you can execute on your own. 4 categories are founder mindset, investor psychology, killer narrative, and prep and process. Okay. So let's start with founder mindset. And I'll start on this topic by asking the question, why are you doing your company? And this is an actual question, and I'd love to just chat with anyone who wants to chat with me, tell me what they're doing, and I'll just ask you the question. Let's see.
I'll go.
Okay, who's that? Let's see. Who just spoke up? Rafael? Hey.
Yeah.
Where in the world are
Hey,
you?
how's it going, Jason? New York.
Very good. Okay, give us 30 seconds on what your company is. Don't try to sell us. Just tell us what you do to start.
Yeah, great. So everyone, Rafael, I'm working on Underwriter. Underwriter simplifies stock buying by allowing for people to have the tools of professionals. What does this mean? No more document diving or trying to figure out what certain financial metrics mean. The stock app just really simplifies this for anyone and everyone.
Very good. Okay. So working on Underwriter, it's a set of tools to help people be better at stock trading. Might have bastardized that, but that's essentially what I heard. Tell me, David, tell me, Rafael, what are you, why are you doing this? Why are you working on Underwriter?
Yeah, I'm working on it because I feel like everyone should have wealth creation tools accessible. Stock buying, building wealth, 401k, that's such a murky thing. And we shouldn't need professionals to participate in these things.
Great. So you think people should have access to wealth, and you think stocks are one of the ways. Why is the access to wealth something that's important to you?
It's important to me because I think of where I grew up. So I grew up in New York, Lower Manhattan, grew up on the proximity of Wall Street, surrounded by a lot of wealth, but I grew up on the poorer side of Manhattan. And seeing a lot of the wealth kind of felt like this invisible wall. Like, how do all these people have access to these things? Why can't an everyday person just access them? And so that's why I'm working on it. And now I live on Wall Street. I am one of those people, and I want to bring more people along.
And why was Wall Street the path that you went down? Like, there are probably other ways to increase wealth in this country. Why is Wall Street important for you?
Yeah, I think just the proximity and the glamour and allure of growing up here in New York and seeing, skyscrapers and people running around in business suits. It just felt like the thing that people were doing and like the path, right? We're talking about New York in the early 90s, not San Francisco in the 2000s. So that was the allure for me. And the more that I dig into it, the more I felt a personal connection here that isn't just based on a material thing in terms of money, but literally personal satisfaction, personal growth, reflection, overcoming trials and tribulations.
Okay. Last why? Why did that personal connection pop up? Like, tell me a little bit about, you say there's a personal connection. Where have you felt that?
Yeah, I've felt that in my own wealth creation journey. So trying to understand these things on my own, going on to study economics, actually becoming an investment banker for some time. And I just realized over time, like, this is such a purposefully murky field, like similar to accounting, right? We shouldn't need accountants to file our taxes. It should be something that's straightforward. And so for me, it feels like a mission to just really make wealth creation accessible.
Love it. Okay, that's super helpful. I'm going to get back to this in a second. I think I saw Jessica raise your hand, and if not, I'm just going to call you. Jessica.
Yeah.
How are you? Where in the world are you?
Hi from Miami.
Miami. Okay. Can you do the same thing and tell me in 30 seconds? Don't sell me. Just tell me what the company you work on is.
We're building an AI personal assistant for product managers. That way they can reach product market fit faster without the need of hiring more teams.
Love it. Okay. Why? What's it called?
Ask Me.
Ask Me. Okay. Why are you working on Ask Me?
Because I couldn't perform good on my last job because I was lacking a lot of resources. And I was lacking also a lot of information on the data. So I want to solve that problem so people don't go through what I had to go through.
Why is that problem that you ran into important?
Reaching to product market fit is actually one of the main blockers that startups have right now. Because if you don't have product market fit, it is very hard for you not only to acquire customers, but also to raise money. And the environment is very competitive right now. So not getting there, it's actually going to put a toll on your startup. So that's one of the main concerns that I want to tackle, because I left it as a founder and also as an employee. And I think that if I can remove that obstacle, then startups can have a higher chance of actually performing better.
And why do you care about startups performing better?
My background is that not only I'm a founder, but also I am an investor with my family office. So I need the companies to do great in order for me to get my return of investment.
Amazing. And why is even getting a return on investment in startups important to you?
So generational wealth, I'm creating it for my descendants, and that's one. And second, my whole family depend on me. So I need the companies that I am investing or the ones I'm founding to perform good in order to achieve that. So it's more of like a personal type of situation here.
Love it. Okay. Jessica and Rafael, thanks both of you for doing that demonstration. So there's a reason we go through this exercise of the whys. And a lot of times you'll see this progression that goes fairly superficial, and then it starts picking at the deeper reasons someone is working on this. And when we were talking to Rafael, it took a while for me to understand maybe the fourth question. It was like, oh, he was an investment banker before. And by living that life of being an investment banker, he realized, like, man, all this stuff is shrouded in vocabulary that just like doesn't need to be so vague, doesn't need to be so opaque. And with Jessica, like kind of understanding her personal connection of both being a founder and an investor, and just understanding deeply what the blocker of getting to product market fit is, and why she understands it. This is wealth creation at its peak. These are super important things to be calling out. And actually, when we got to this, exercise, a lot of people would start in a very superficial way. And many of you might do this as you start describing your company, right? It's this idea of like, let me just describe supply and demand. Let me describe the problem and solution. And that might be the thing that you think is important. But what I want to show you is this idea of purity of motivation. So it's a concept called purity of motivation. I wish I had come up. I love naming things, and I wish I had come up with it. But this was passed down to me by different investors. Purity of motivation is one of these things that every great investor is looking for when they are talking to founders. They might not call it purity of motivation, but they're looking for it, right? For a few different reasons. The biggest of which I think is just this idea that running a startup is really freaking hard. All of you are doing it right now. I can see Jack just nodding his head. He probably went through some shit last week. But it's really freaking hard. And not many people realize that. Investors realize that because they do it over and over and over again. They see companies that are starting and they try to understand how they can help them. And the reason people are looking for purity of motivation is the cliche that like money isn't everything. It's such a cliche. It's very hard to understand until you go through certain things in life. But if what you're going after is solely to sell Dandelion for $5 billion so you can enrich yourself, then Alex, like you're in for a rude awakening around the journey to get there, which is that you're going to be banging your head against the wall for a while. And what I tell people is that everyone in this call is like, I get it already. You guys are super dedicated, hard workers, which means you have grit and you wouldn't have gotten here without that. What that means is like, you're going to run into a wall, and SJ is going to run to this wall, and she's going to break down that first wall. And it's awesome. And then second wall comes up and she's like, I'm a fighter. I'm going to break down this wall. And then the third wall, and then the fourth wall. And she's just a hard worker. But what happens when you run into that 10th wall? And sometimes you have ups and sometimes you have downs, and the wall comes later and you have some successes and there's another wall. If there isn't actually something that you enjoy doing, or that drives you to do it, or that is just like burning inside of you to keep doing it, it's going to be really hard to keep going past that 10th wall. And I felt it in a lot of different settings, running companies that I shouldn't have been running, and now running a company that I love running. The idea is like, we could be having a good day or a bad day, but we need to know that Erica is like fully committed to this. And so they will be asking you questions. They will be probing your backgrounds. They'll be trying to figure out why you're doing this. And they're trying to get to purity of motivation. And you have to find that for yourself so that when it comes out, when you're just talking to an investor, you're not going to head fake things. It should just come out naturally that like you're in this, right? And this is where we start in all of my programs, because it's like, kind of don't want you to go after venture backing if you don't have purity of motivation. And the last thing I'll say around it is that while purity of motivation a lot of times feels like a personal connection to a business problem, or like you used to experience the problem yourself, there's also, you should know that there are just business nerds out there that just love the challenge of solving a business problem, and that could be you. But a lot of times people trick themselves into thinking that they are just a business nerd and love solving any problems, even if they don't have a connection to it. So anyways, I'll table that conversation, something for you to write down for yourself, just to explore your own connection to your business, but super important in how you engage with investors, especially at the earliest stages. Okay. Check, doing well. Okay. Investor psychology. This is one of the most important concepts and areas to learn around fundraising in order to get creative and more effective at what you're doing. So we are going to go through an exercise with another volunteer, and it's to sell me this pen. Has anyone here been in sales before? Or does anyone want to try to sell me this pen? This is usually one that people don't like doing. And so this probably means that I will have to cold call someone. Let's see. All right, no volunteers. Sheila. Yeah, looking away from the screen. Caught her. We're gonna take you off mute and see. So have you seen this? Have you seen this question before? Sell me this pen, or have you heard about this?
No.
Okay, great. It's a really common question that people get asked in sales interviews. Okay, we're just going to go through this, and don't worry if you have if you don't know or think you know what you're doing. There are no wrong answers here. But you saw the picture of the pen flash up.
Mm-hmm.
Try to sell me the pen.
Oh my God. Okay. Hey, Jason, how are you today?
Hi, nice to meet you, Sheila.
And so what do you do for work?
I run an education program for founders.
Awesome. And do you ever meet founders in person?
I do.
Really? And when you meet them in person, are you trying to take mental notes? How do you keep track of what you're working on with them?
Sometimes I'll try to keep it in my head. Sometimes I'll put it in my phone. I've tried pen and paper before.
Mm-hmm. And how does the phone work out for you? Do you like being on your phone, potentially taking notes while you're talking to someone?
Yeah, I kind of hate it. I try to get rid of my phone whenever I can.
Got it. Well, I have this product that's called a black pen, and it can help you be more relaxed in a coffee setting, and I really think you should try it out. And so maybe I can give you a free sample. You can take it on your next meeting and let me know how you feel.
Sheila, very good. I love that. First of all, everyone give her like a little visual applause. Not easy to be cold called, not easy to be cold called around something she had never done before. Have you been in sales ever?
No, but I am pitching as we speak. So,
but now you are a CEO, so
yeah.
you do have to sell a lot. Okay. The reason I walk people through this simulation is because of what the right answer is. And Sheila actually was not so far off. I'll tell you, most founders, when they come in, they will lead by saying, let me tell you about this pen and tell you all the amazing things about the pen. The pen is black. It's, it's sleek looking. It's blah, blah, blah. But usually I would ask people to see if they knew what the right answer is. There is actually a right answer to how you answer the question, sell me this pen. And the right answer is that, what people get trained to do is, as a salesperson, the only way you can sell something is if you can get in the mind of the buyer, because you don't know why people are actually making their buying decisions. So the right answer to sell me this pen would be to start not so far off from where Sheila started, but it would be, before I tell you about this pen, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more. Like, tell me about your business. Tell me more about your business and what are the problems you're facing, right? With the pen, it could be a statement piece. It could be like, the only reason that I need a pen is to look cool if it's in my jacket pocket. If maybe it's a paperweight, and maybe it's just something I want on my desk so that papers don't fly away. But if you don't know what I'm looking for or what problems my business is facing, then you're going to sell me the wrong things, right? Sheila went down this path of like trying to figure out if I need to take notes, when maybe it turns out like my papers fly away from my desk all the time, in which case you would just say, this is the heaviest pen you'll ever see. It's amazing. And then you'll be able to actually connect with what they're looking for. Now, that's a long way of getting you ready to think about investor psychology. The reason this is so important, and the reason why people mess this part up about fundraising, is that they don't think about how investors make decisions. They don't know what their business model is. They don't know how they're evaluating companies. They think they know. They're like, okay, well, investors, they put money in and they want companies to sell. But like, really challenge yourself to deeply understand how investors make decisions. We're not going to get into that right now, but what I'll tell you is that do everything you can to like get smarter about this and learn quickly. One of the easiest ways to do that is to start consuming content, right? I have a little bit of content that I think helps with this, but I would recommend you look for opportunities to hear VCs speak. As much as I kind of think Harry Stebbings is annoying, he talks to a lot of VCs, and hearing VCs talk about their decision-making process and what they look for in founders is really helpful. I think the Latitude podcast does it well. There's LA and Venture. And if you can find time with VCs that are friendly, maybe hopefully in your network, and take them out for coffee and just hear about what they do and not pitch them. One, that'd be a great way to create a relationship, but two, just like kind of learn a little bit more about how VCs make decisions. I know that kind of sounds overly simplistic, but that'll be really helpful in how you pitch and how you engage with VCs during your process. Okay. Next, the third category of fundraising keys that I go through and a lot of people love. Like when they think about fundraising, everyone thinks about the narrative. It's what everyone runs to. I personally don't think it's the most important thing, but they're all super important. So we have to spend time. The thing that I do love about narrative development is that, it's this idea of the journey is the destination. A good example and the story that I always tell is this. I went to business school, and as I was getting ready for business school, people were like, spend time on the application, spend time on the application. The application, that process is more valuable than anything else. And I would kind of roll my eyes at that. That sounds so dumb, like the application process is valuable. But it turns out they were right. In a business school application, you're forced to write essays about why are you going to business school and what do you hope to do with an MBA, and like where does your career path lead you to, where the MBA is part of that. And for me, it was kind of the first time that I actually intentionally thought about what I wanted to do in my career and put words to paper and really think about that. And I actually did isolate this idea that I wanted to build businesses. I wanted to be a founder. I wanted to be in startups. And it really influenced everything I did. And the same thing goes for the development of your narrative. I think as you're running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to build the earliest stages of your company, you can start adding a bunch of stuff to what you're doing in your company. And one of the most focusing efforts you can do is be like, I need to start telling my story in a really concise an impactful way, what is that going to look like? And what am I going to start carving out and like leaving behind in order to tell this great story? And it turns out going through that process can be super valuable in focusing your efforts, not just how you tell your story, but actually where you spend your time. So I tell everyone, like, when it comes to creating a great narrative, a great deck, et cetera, the journey is the destination for sure. And you're not just creating a song and dance for investors, you're actually doing work that will improve your company. So narrative development is super important. I will show this. There are a lot of, I'll show this slide in a lot of my workshops, but a lot of times it's like, well, why are we doing this? Why are we creating a better narrative? Why are we putting a data room together with all these things? And a lot of people will be like, well, it's to sound better to investors. But it turns out the things that sound better to investors are actually the things that indicate you're running a better business. So a lot of the things as you're going through it and trying to be better at fundraising, it's like, oh, well, we're doing it to sound better to investors, but it turns out you're also just doing it to run a better business. So think about all these things and make sure you focus on them. So let's go into a few narrative frameworks. These are examples of ways that approaching your narrative, well, one, thinking about your narrative in these frameworks can be very helpful in simplifying and more clearly communicating. We'll talk about 4 of them, 4 out of a number of frameworks we can use. But for today, we'll talk about naming your enemy, simply impressive, the nod along effect, and less is more. So let's do this quickly. I like this idea of naming your enemy or describing the battle. This is one example of a number of frameworks you can use that help founders describe what they're doing in a way that will actually resonate with a listener who may or may not know a lot about the background or the industry that you're working on. This is not the only way you can do it, but if you think about this idea of naming your enemy and describing the battle, you come up with a framework that people can get on one side of and can support you around without actually knowing what's going on. So what is the person, place, thing, situation, tragedy, plague that you're fighting against? You want to make these pull on the emotional heartstrings of someone so they're like, yeah, that is really bad. That is a really deep pain point before you keep going on. So the example I give is actually my own company right now. You heard my non-pitchy description at the beginning, right? I said, we make fundraising easier and more accessible for founders. When I want to describe what I'm doing, that is exactly what I do. But if I'm trying to get someone really excited about what I work on, that's not really what I do. What I talk about is actually what got me into this more and why I realized it was way bigger is that there's this crazy injustice around what fundraising skills do to the opportunities in front of a founder. There's this crazy thing where obviously great founders with great funding skills are going to get funded. But a lot of bad founders with great fundraising skills are also going to get funded. And there's this category of founders that are incredible builders, are deep industry expertise, want to change the world, want to make the world a better place, want to solve problems, but they don't know the first thing about fundraising. And it turns out those founders don't get funded. And that sucks. It's like, the world should hate that. The world should be like, well, how do we fix that? Because of all the good that startups do and all the good that these experts could do. And that's actually the problem that I'm trying to solve, right? So if you think about it, we make fundraising easier and more accessible for more founders. It's like, well, if I don't work in startups or venture capital or work with founders, like I don't care, right? But if I tell you the battle and the injustice, all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I kind of want to support this guy. So in your own world, this doesn't always fit with every story. But if you think about what you're working on, can it be positioned in this way? Can you think about the struggle that you're trying to help people overcome? So that's naming your enemy and describing the battle. Next is this idea of simply impressive. So one of the things that we'll see a lot of in founders is imposter syndrome. Raise your hand if you think you have at least some elements of imposter syndrome. I certainly do. Okay, 2 hands for Nico. I should have put 2 hands up. What ends up happening with imposter syndrome is that you show up to pitch meetings and you show up in front of these investors who are on a pedestal, essentially. You're like, it's money. And you start feeling judged and you start feeling like, I need to show how good I am. And so a lot of times how that manifests itself in a pitch is that someone's like, I'm going to show this person how much I know about the stock market. Raphael is going to be like, I know these people are judging me. They don't think I know this space. Let me show them everything that I learned as an investment banker. And the details will start coming out. And you'll start really explaining these things in ways that, like, honestly, for most investors will go over their heads because you are the deepest expert in the room at that point. But if you've done that, if you're trying to impress people with your own knowledge, detailed knowledge, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because if you think about it, there are a couple ways this could go. There are the investors that don't know what you're talking about and don't know the detail, in which case all that stuff goes over their head and you've confused them and you've already lost them there. So that's one bad thing. And then they ask you questions and they're like, throws you off. But that's not as bad as the situation that will more likely happen, because VCs are prideful and whatever, is that you'll confuse them and you'll use a lot of detail that they don't understand, and then they won't ask you questions and you won't have a chance to explain, and then you will have totally lost them. The worst case scenario that you go and try to be simple about how you describe it is that you talk to someone who already knows the space and they're like, Raphael, yes, I was an investment banker too. I get it. Like, let's move on. Okay, let's move on. He understands. But for everyone else that didn't have that background, you've made sure that they understand what you're talking about and you get to actually tell the story that you want to tell. So when I talk about this, I talk about simply impressive, and I talk about this idea of pitching the circle, not the equation. When you're trying to be as simple as possible, you don't want to talk about the pi r squared. How do I represent a circle, pi r squared? Kind of just want to show a black circle. Like, oh, I know exactly what this person is talking about. I don't have to know what pi means. I don't have to know what r means. I don't have to know what math is. I know what a circle is. So really think about being simply impressive. Think about pitching the circle, not the equation. Okay. So as we go through fundraising and like a lot of different applications of fundraising, you'll see this idea of momentum over and over and over again, at a micro scale, at a macro scale, at a bigger level. Everything is going to be about momentum because of limited time, because of limited data, and how impactful just momentum can be in this process. So the nod along effect talks a little bit about momentum within your story that you're telling. What we're trying to do is control for growing understanding and growing excitement around what you do. And the way you do that is by making sure that you lay out one point that people can agree upon, and then use that to build on to the next thing and next thing and next thing. What we're trying to do is go, yes, 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 yes. And do you know what that final yes is going to be, Steve? I'm going to cold call you. Steve, what are we trying to get to? It's like the nod along effect, bigger and bigger nods. What's the final?
Yeah, trying to get to consensus and further down the funnel, I guess, of what would the next step look like.
Darn.
No?
No, that's the right answer.
Okay.
A lot of people go, I don't know, yes, I want to invest. And that's actually not what we're trying to get to with the narrative, right? Because it takes a little bit of time and a lot more engagement to get someone to say yes right away. What we're trying to do is, yes. I'd like to learn more, Steve.
Yeah, we went through this exercise recently, at least along the narratives that you're talking about, and internally, I'm just trying to simplify it because we're a biotech. A lot of the conversation tends to focus on science.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting in the room with people, what's the simplest way that we can communicate? I don't want to say checkpoints, but like, again, a narrative of milestones or things that you've done that check those boxes for somebody to continue down the funnel in a fundraising process. And so I was just pulling up that note that we were sharing on it anyways, and it's similar to the nod along effect. So
Good, man. And the other thing to note for everyone is just like, you need to get people excited to nod along and say next steps. And an expertise set and like an expertise setting. I've never been an investment banker for Raphael's business. I've never been in biotech for Steve. I've never been a product manager for Jessica, let's assume. But when I get to the next step, I'll probably enlist someone in my network who is a deeper expert, and then will help me do the diligence. But in that first step, we are trying to get people excited and like, there is something here. This is big. Steve is something I want to learn more about. Okay? Awesome. Yeah. Let's go on.
And I'm not even a scientist. So that's like that's the fun part about it.
Dude, perfect. Then you should be great at explaining your business to other non-scientists, right? I'll call out here is that the nod along effect, the other part about the nod along effect that helps you isolate is the things that break momentum. So if you find that you're telling a story in a way that is like overly confusing, a good example is if we were like just looking on a deck, for example, and you get to a slide and it's so detailed and it just takes so long for someone to read. That's going to break, even if you're not presenting it, like you just send it to them, that's going to break the nod along effect. And they're just, the average amount of time that an investor spends on a deck is sub 3 minutes at this point. So you need to be able to communicate each step of the storytelling process in a way that doesn't make people pause or lose momentum. Okay. And the last thing, so the last framework that I'll help you think through is this idea of less is more. I usually encourage people to try working through a slide deck that gets to set 10 slides. Does the deck explode if you have more than 10 slides? No. But what I do find is that any founder, there's a red flag for me where like, if a founder can't really get down to a simple 10 slide deck, especially if they're hovering around 20 slides and they're like, we can't really eliminate any other slides. To me, that is an indication of not knowing what the actual problem that they're trying to solve is, like not knowing exactly why their company exists, because they're like, well, this thing is also important and this thing is also important. The best founders that have product market fit and know what they're doing, their decks are so streamlined. If they wanted to tell their story, they have no question. It's this. It is this very specific thing. And if you don't agree with it, then we shouldn't be talking. So less is more. I'd highly recommend you try to get there as a focusing exercise. And the way this usually works and plays itself out is addition by subtraction, which is like, you might have a lot of ideas about your company, about your story, and you should. But what you're going to try to do is carve away and carve away and carve away until it gets more and more focused and really stands out as a very specific, emblematic story, similar to how these logos get created. Okay. I'm going to mention one of the exercises that we run founders through. We're not going to do it here, but it's called a rubber band exercise. It's a type of rubber band exercise. And the idea of a rubber band exercise is that it's an exercise that stretches you beyond where you actually need to be. We stretch and stretch and stretch. And when we let go, it sort of reforms itself closer to where you need to be, right? Because we've stretched you out. And so the rubber band exercise, I actually flashed it up, is a 6-slide deck. Can you throw away what you have today and just be like, if I had to do it, what would a 6-slide deck look like? And you can do it just in bullet points. Like, what would the 6 bullet points that I use to sell the opportunity to work with me be? And it's hard, and it's, it's a thought exercise, but when you get down to it, you're like, okay, 6 points, 6 slides. And then it's what's like, once you're there, you're like, okay, well, if I was allowed to add one more slide, what would that look like? And then add one more slide. And then you can kind of get to this point where you're like, oh, this is really simple. And this represents in the most straightforward way what we are and what we do. Okay. All right. You're jumping into the last stage here. And remember, I'm pretty sure this is a 90-minute workshop. We used to do this in 60 minutes and it was just too rushed. Because this actually is the most important thing that anyone should be talking about when it comes to fundraising, but I don't think most of the people that are in this space, who I greatly respect, don't focus on this. This is my focus. Preparation process is my focus. And when I talk about this, I always provide this quote, which will make much more sense or resonate more with the Americans in the crowd, but hopefully this sort of directionally makes sense for people. But Abraham Lincoln, 16th president of the United States, very important president in our history, has this quote about, chopping down a tree. So given 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. I think this is a really important concept because most people rush into fundraising and they're like, okay, fundraising is asking people for money. Let's go. I'm going to start asking people for money. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that founders make. And I'll illustrate this by asking a quick question. Who here has already pitched and gotten a no? Anyone want to raise their hand? Let's see a new David Bosnick from Attune. How are you, David?
I'm good. How you doing? Sorry.
Where in the world are you?
I'm in LA.
Oh, very cool. Okay. Tell me a little bit about it. So you pitched, when was the last no you got?
The last no was about 2 weeks ago.
Very good. Still raw. How did it feel?
Not great.
Good. I'm glad there's a second where you wanted to put on a brave face and be like, it's part of being a founder, it's part of pitching. I'm glad you said not great. When I went to fundraise, my last fundraise, I was an ex-venture capitalist. So I could get to anyone I wanted to talk to. I was maybe a half step away. And a lot of the people I was pitching were friends. So in some ways, like, one, you'd think that I'd do really well.
Mhm.
In other ways, every time I got a no, it was almost more painful because it was like, these people know me. But I got tons and tons of no's. And I'll tell you, like, even as a great fundraiser, even as a great founder, no one likes hearing no. So David, the fact that it didn't feel great, not unique. But I appreciate you standing up and being vulnerable enough to say that it didn't feel good. Because what I'd love to talk through is a few of the reasons, but one of the main reasons that we create process. So what I always say is that some people might come up and say, like, they're really brave about fundraising and getting no's, and no's feel bad, but like, I'm going to keep soldiering on. But it turns out, like, I think everyone thinks that they can take a no until they've heard 20 no's, 30 no's, 40 no's, 50 no's. That can batter you. Like, really, I mean, it makes you question everything you're doing because everyone's telling you no. And you're like, should I be doing this? Like, everyone here, I would keep picking on Raphael because we talk, but like, Raphael was an investment banker making a lot of money. I mean, I would guess a good amount of money. I would guess he probably doesn't make that much money anymore as a startup founder. And so, like, everyone has a lot of opportunity cost. And when you get no's over and over again, this stuff feels terrible. And add on top of it the fact that so much of convincing an investor is making sure that they believe in you, that they see your confidence in what you're doing. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to continue to be confident when you're getting these no's unless you've created a process around yourself that insulates you from these no's. So when you create a process and you do your preparation work ahead of time, which is the whole idea of prep and process, instead of going through a no and then stewing on that no and being like, okay, what is the next investor that I'm going to pitch? How do I find them? God, that no, cannot believe they said no. I can't believe they were so harsh about it. All right, well, what's the next meeting I'm going to take? I don't know. I got to figure it out. Instead of that, what we're trying to do is set up a process where you did all that research work in front. You started setting up all the meetings. And while it feels bad, that no, the next one's coming up and you just don't have a second to think about it. You're like, whatever, that person, that person's lost, on to the next one. And you're putting your trust in the process that you've set up ahead of time, which really bolsters your own confidence going from good meetings to bad meetings to bad meetings to good meetings. And what we're trying to do by creating that process is really, cultivating this idea of with or without you. You are trying to create a process that is moving. It's just always moving. And if someone passes, you don't care because this is going to get done with or without them. Okay. The thing about process that I like illustrating and why it's so important is understanding when an investor decides to invest. Okay. And I usually use this analogy of investor poker. Not everyone plays poker, Texas Hold'em understands, but for those that you do, this will hopefully make sense. Let's say, I'd like to create this situation that's like an investor playing poker where she meets, I'm going to find someone with a good name here who has their camera on. Yeah, she meets Jack. Jack had was nodding his head before about the hardships of being a founder, but this investor meets Jack and sees that he has a background that completely fits what he's working on. And not only that, but he's working with somebody he worked with before. That is one of those things that we would call pocket aces for an investor playing poker, as in this is a really good hand. This is something that indicates there's a good chance that I want to bet on this hand. Does the investor place her bet then when she pulls pocket aces? Maybe, maybe not. After the flop, you get a couple things happening. Wow, 3 more spades hit the board. There's also a flush. There's also straight draw. So flush, straight, man, this is a really good hand, right? We start seeing more and more opportunities. So does the investor place her bet then? This would be the equivalent of hearing from Jack about different customer interviews and how much they love his product, and maybe an LOI getting signed, and a back channel comment from another investor is saying oh, we really like Jack. So does she invest then? Because now it's looking even. Does anyone know if she invests now or later? The answer is that, oh, Steven. Love the volunteer. Hold on, you are muted.
Part of it is, what card she has in her hand, but part of it is the momentum.
Yeah.
Of what, because what we're finding is sometimes you've got 3 people interested. They want to lead. They're got we'll give you the soft commitment right now, but we're not there. Or, that's part of the problem. It's not just what's in your hand, but it's okay, what is the rest of the table thinking?
Exactly. Because what Stephen just said is exactly the situation of playing investor poker. You've got a great hand, things look good, but the answer is that an investor will always wait to see the next card. 100% of the time. You can quote me on it. An investor will always wait to see the next card, unless they think they are going to either miss the deal or miss out on investing at this price. The only 2 reasons they would not wait to see the next card, because they'll always look to de-risk if they think they can without missing the price or the deal altogether. And so what we need to do is create a process that makes them feel that. They need to feel that. Otherwise, they will just keep giving you the most common pass that you probably have all heard, which is, Sheila, I'm sorry, you're awesome, but just a little bit too early, just a little bit too early. Would love to, come back when you have one other thing. Yeah. And so what I tell people is, if you're not running a process, you are making the most common mistake in fundraising, which is this idea of sort of disparate, piecemeal investment conversations where Steve will have one conversation, and then with Jason Yeh, it's like, oh, that was pretty good. Not really sure how it goes. Okay, who else am I going to pitch? Who else am I going to pitch? Jonathan Lee. I've heard Jonathan's a great investor. Go reach out to Jonathan, have the meeting. How did that go? Not sure. Let me talk to Paige Randall. She's one of the best angels I know. She passed. Shoot. What else do I do? And this is what, in some variation of this happens over and over again, which is founders go and they're just like, they're going to talk to a bunch of investors, but they piecemeal them together. And so what we are trying to do is react to this idea of like a single arrow is easily broken, but a bundle of 10 is not. We can apply this to the idea of fundraising processes, and it's not a bundle of 10. Actually, my challenge to people is usually a bundle of 100, but the quote was 10, so I had to go this way. So we are trying to get people to bundle their processes, and you might have heard this concept that I coined called calendar density. This is essentially the encapsulation of so many different important things that you can do. But if you are working towards calendar density in your process, you're doing a lot of the right things. So it's a simplification of a lot of the things you should work on. If you can get to this idea of calendar density, where your first meetings are happening all in a tightly bundled, about 2-ish week period of time, then you have set yourself up for a much better opportunity of success than if you have a loose process with zero pressure. Okay. So how do we do this? The biggest fix that I can share around this is this. It's how you launch your intros. This is the biggest takeaway. And it's such a slight, subtle fix, which is most people say, I'm going to launch my fundraise. And the way they launch their fundraise is they go and they say, okay, I'm launching my fundraise. Nico, can you introduce me to Giovanna? When a real launch should happen after you do all of your asking for intros. If there's one little tactic that'll help you, it's this. If you are going to fundraise in the future, first go around to everybody and ask people, hey, would you introduce me to this person? You would? Okay, amazing. I'm not raising right now. I'm just trying to make sure I understand who would make these introductions so that when you go launch your fundraise, you can go, okay, I've mapped everything. I understand how to do this. Let's go. And it's all going to happen at once then. That's essentially what you can do in order to get to calendar density. It's this idea of getting everything to the starting line, creating your timelines around it, and then saying, go. Right? That is the biggest adjustment that you can make that will be incredibly helpful in how you run your fundraise. So, perfect. We got to 5 minutes past the hour. I'm going to tell you a couple things for free content stuff that will continue to help you. And then we're going to open up the floor to question and answers. So first of all, I share a lot of my content in very vague and esoteric sound bites, the way I talked about, but sometimes they can be helpful. So if you like some of this content, there's Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm Jay Yeh in both of them. Jonathan or Paige, can you send through those links into the chat? Awesome. And then just so you know, because you guys registered, if you haven't gotten these before, we're going to send you this big database lump of a few things that I think can be helpful in fundraisers. So we have email outreach templates. We have a database of 10,000 investor names that we keep adding to. We accumulate other people's lists. We add to our own lists. we keep maintaining that, excuse me. And then our fundraising field notes newsletter, which I write an essay about this stuff every week. So that's for you guys. That's my newsletter. My podcast is very helpful. Hope you guys find that. And then tomorrow we're actually doing another program. There are two main things that we're driving people towards. One is to show you guys some of the simulation work we do within FWC. So we'll do that for the first, call it 15 minutes or so. And then tomorrow is really meant to be like, if you have any detailed questions about the program FWC, we're gonna, a lot of founders who are going through the application process are going to be joining for that. So we won't take questions about the program today. We just want to answer questions about fundraising. But if you want to join for tomorrow, you should. I'd love to answer those questions then. The program that I'm talking about is called Fundraise with Confidence. Our applications are actually due Wednesday for this cohort. Fundraisewithconfidence.com. If you guys can send that through, Jonathan, Paige, that'd be great. And last, before we get to Q&A, I saw some LA names. And I've started I'm just starting an effort to build back in real life community in LA, which I don't think has come back that much. And I'm doing it a little differently. Most people try to do events at night and happy hour. I actually don't drink that much anymore. And I feel like the 5:30, 6 o'clock meetup is also awkward. So I'm launching this thing called Dawn Patrol, which is an early morning meetup in LA for morning people. And there's no agenda, just good people coming together for coffee. And because I have a great network of friends who span investors and entrepreneurs, so those are the type of people that'll be coming. Patron Capital, All-in-One Ventures, Water Tower Ventures, Cobsis, bunch of investors are coming, a bunch of founders are coming. So if you want to come and say hi, I would love to see you. 8 a.m. So an early morning Dawn Patrol coffee at Justa in Venice. And please RSVP if you want to come. It's lo.ma Dawn Patrol 510. It's in Venice, SJ. So I know that might be hard for some people, but okay. We got through the whole thing and I left exactly how much time that I wanted to leave for Q&A. So I would love to pull apart any questions people might have around what they're going through in fundraising, and feel free to throw up a digital hand to chat. David from LA. What part of LA are you in, David?
I'm in Sherman Oaks.
Okay, you can go down the 405 to the 10 to get to.
Yeah, no, 8 a.m. There's no problem there.
Tell me, what's up?
So, love your content, been following you for a bit. Built out to do our fundraise. The first time we were looking at it was like last May when crypto melted everything down. Then went to focus to try and put first time, yeah. Then actually did the calendar density not ploy, it's terrible use of words, for last October. But there was just, I managed to put in several meetings. We had good meetings, but nothing ended up happening. So now relaunching again now, but I've already done a lot of the like scraping my LinkedIn and like saying, hey, can you make me these intros? Cold outreach has yet to work for me at all. What's the next step?
Yeah, so a few things I can react to here. A lot of people got caught bad place, bad time. You know, just timing in the market sucks, and that's not your fault. You just who would have known? And honestly, October, you probably caught a couple other falling knives, right? So like that's the reality of what last year was like, and then people caught it again with freaking SVB. Yeah, it's just been brutal. First of all, like cold outreach is really hard. I think I am a huge proponent of warm outreach, so I would rather spend more time on that. But I do tell people that probably 10 to 15% of outreach in any fundraise should be cold. by the end of it, there's this trade-off between time and like essentially time to try to get to someone warm and just wasting time. And so you're like, at that last point, you're like, these last people, they all go into the cold outreach bucket. They'll do best in a cold outreach and, you know, have a 5% hit rate for a response. That's fine. The more important feedback to give you is around the idea of restarting a fundraise. The biggest thing you should know is that everyone that you talked to before should be in your list. I don't know if you've thought about that, but like everyone should be, because the reality is, in your head, you probably have the anxiety of like, oh my God, this investor knows that I like was fundraising and they passed, or, you know, was fundraising and then I shut it down, and they know that I had like, you know, months of trials and tribulations and it didn't work out. They're going to think I'm a loser. The reality is, this is not true. Like, the reality is investors are talking to so many founders, and if they did have one interaction with you and then they passed, that's where the story ends for them. So when you go restart any fundraise, anyone, you get to go back and kind of clean up the narrative, what they heard, and be like, hey, Paige, we talked last May. As you know, we were fundraising just as the markets were like crashing. So we decided to pause. And we've spent the last 7 months focused on X, Y, and Z. A lot of the things we talked about changed. And, you know, we actually addressed, you know, whatever you'd say X, Y, and Z. We have a lot of interest right now, and we're setting up a process. We'd love for you to be part of, you know, our first week of interviews, which are of pitches, which are coming up in a few weeks' time. So the reality is, you're not lying at all. You did pause your fundraise. They have no idea when you paused your fundraise or stopped your fundraise or whatever, but you're just going into it with this, like, you have to go into it with a renewed sense of confidence around what you're doing. And then, you know, in terms of anything else you can do, I'd say, honestly, any sort of last second one-to-many networking you can do, I think can help just put a little bit more awareness around who you are, add a couple other, you know, pieces of network. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you read my content around angel armies, but an angel army can be a great way to sort of reinvigorate your own opportunity set. But because by adding on even the smallest checks, what you're doing is you're adding credibility and new network. So a lot of work to get done, but you didn't sign up for a job that doesn't require a lot of work. So that's how I would think about a restart.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
No worries. Let's see. Jack, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So, you know, right now I'm sort of struggling with a very similar story of, you know, this is my first time going at this, and I came out of college and started the startup. So my network isn't really that big. And additionally, what I'm doing right now is trying to develop an electric jet ski. And, you know, a common thing I hear is people saying, you know, well, I'd like to see, you know, people who maybe have placed pre-orders, or, you know, people who have tried it, but it's pretty capital intensive to make that first prototype, or the prototype that could put somebody on, to be able to get that sort of traction. So I kind of find myself in this catch-22 of, you know, an investor might invest if we had, you know, some more, you know, tests available for, and you know, people who, testimonies of people who've used the product, but I can't get the product to a testimony until I get some funding in. So,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tough chicken and egg problem. The reality is, there are investors who have invested pre-traction on hardware products before. And so, and a lot of the people that you're talking to probably have invested in companies at a similar stage as you. Like, so they're saying we need to see more traction before we invest. But the thing that everyone should take away from that response is not that in general, at all times, I need to see more traction. They're saying that for you, Jack. They're saying you as a founder and your story, I am not excited enough to invest right now, and you would need more traction. So there are two things to take away from that. One could be that you are not telling your story in a way that is getting people excited enough today. So you need to understand why that's happening. Is part of your story not showing that they should believe in you? Like, what are your credentials around that? What progress have you shown that indicates that you're going to get to that next stage and they will miss out on this valuation unless they invest now? Or the second could be that, Jack, you are super, young and inexperienced, and that you do need to be able to show more. It might not be actual customers or whatever. It might be more validation of the market. It might be, it's harder for me to without knowing exactly your business, but efforts to show demand for it, even, running a landing page that has people clicking on your designs. Maybe it's your marketing of those things. But the challenge for you is really to do whatever it takes to get people excited about the story. And there is no silver bullet to fixing this. So you just have to understand why it's happening to you. Okay.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
That's helpful. Steve, how are you, man?
Good. Thanks for taking the question, Jason. Thanks for the content. This is a two-part question. You had a post that was recently about fundraising as a team sport and resonated within our team. Our team has kind of established different roles in the build up to our fundraising process. The majority of the preparation falling in my lap. We have somebody that's more focused on science and regulatory, and then we have our original founder that is obviously big vision and leadership. And so it's a two-part question. One, what have you found when you're in the role that is more on my side of the preparation and process and the build? And then secondly, how you leverage the potential of a change in valuation as your company chalks off milestones as you prepare for that raise. So I know there may not be totally related, but as time goes on and as we, as the calendar goes on and we chalk milestones off, we consider, again, that nod along effect of momentum. Do we get to a point where we use that as a tactic in leading into a raise or in a raise?
Okay, good questions. Very different, but happy to answer both of them. So let's talk about your role. So are you the CEO? You're not the founder?
No, I am a small stake investor in the company. Employee number 4, I guess you could say. And yeah, a lot of the development that has happened within the company, expanding from Europe to Africa, Europe to the Middle East, and now Europe to North America, has fallen in my lap. But as we've kind of self-funded through angels, we've now got to a stage where we're preparing for a larger raise with bigger partners, and yeah.
So is the plan for you to be the primary fundraiser?
As a team, well, that's the thing, is we're also global. So we have one of us, the head of science, is in Lebanon. The headquarters are in Ireland, in Dublin and Galway, and then myself here, starting to build the team within North America. So we've kind of established what our strengths are as we've pitched the company to date and built the company to date. But it's different, or at least I'm understanding that the role and interaction is going to be different as we go into a fundraise. And a lot of the preparation and process of things that you've preached that I've been trying to build up for us. I know that's only one role of it. So one piece of it. There are the roles of my teammates and what role they play in that as well. So yeah, just maybe some of the lessons and things that you've seen from your experience of hey, people have different roles in the fundraise process. How do we bring that all together? To increase our odds of success.
Okay, so it sounds like you're a little bit later stage, so because there's a full team in place. So you have a little bit more benefit than some of the other people on this call might have in terms of the number of hands that can help. the first thing I would say is like whether it's pre-seed or at your stage, the founder CEO, the CEO needs to be the main fundraiser. So you might be helping behind the scenes and setting all these things up, but it's got to be the CEO like that's pitching. And so I don't know if the CEO, she or him, is like ready to do that.
Oh, 100%, 100%. But when you
second-
build it into a process of 3 different time zones, that's where I was like, you know, getting the buy-in of saying, hey, we're all going to lock in our calendars for these times and when these campaigns go out, and you know, like the team effort piece of it, we know it just can't be one person. It's going to take all of us in our respective strengths to do so.
When I use the phrase that fundraising is a team sport, a lot of that has to do with just like externally. It's like you, and then what is your network? Who are the people that are going to try to help you get this across the line, and making sure that you align those people to help you. Internally, it is really about people understanding that the CEO is going to be pulled in a lot of directions during fundraising, and that people need to be aware of that's happening, and kind of help pick up the slack in the core business wherever they can, because he's going to have to start shifting his focus. And then, you know, I've written a little bit about this concept, but fundraising, it turns out, is mostly project management. And like, once you get everything going, it becomes a project management game. And so to have someone like you internally that can help be the project manager, but internally being like, science people, we need your content for the data room as soon as possible. These people, I need this content. CEO, we need you here. And then as the fundraiser is going on, helping track where the processes are, where the emails are, and who needs to follow up with whom. Like that's a lot of the things that people join my program to help with. And you have resources in-house to be able to kind of set up that process yourself. So I don't think that fully answered your question.
No, it did. You know, part of it is, you know, myself wanting to take on more to do that, but I don't want to overstep over the original founder of the company.
Oh, no. I think if you explain this, they should be like, you're a godsend. Like I have, my company. And they will love it because there's so much minutia and detail that most solo founders have to go through when they fundraise, that don't have a team to help them with this, that like, it can be overwhelming, and then you end up avoiding the work because you don't want to do that minutia. The second part of your question around
on the valuation stuff.
I think like I won't go too deep into this, and all I'll say is like we're at an interesting reset point in the market. I don't know exactly what your company does. I don't know if it's part of the.
I'll be there to pitch tomorrow. How's that? I'll give you
part
a
of the
small
class of content, like whether you're AI or climate tech, biotech, or whatever. There are certain protected classes right now that seem to still be lifted up in terms of valuation. Everyone else is going through a reset. And so all I can say is that valuation is market driven, right? So very hard for any company to fully dictate where their milestones or step ups are going to be in terms of how it impacts valuation. And so my best advice would be, you're raising money to hit certain milestones, and you got to create a process in which that you create a competitive dynamic that allows you to get to the market clearing price of this current stage and this current valuation. Even if you had 100 people buying for your company, you could be completely flat to your last round, just because that's where the market is, and you won't know that unless you. Not your answer, but it's the right answer.
No, it's good context. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, John, I am sorry to say this, but I'm going to have to close off our conversation to jump into another meeting. But I do hope people will come back tomorrow. We're going to do some simulations. We'll do some Q&A. But I had a really good time. John, if you want to send in some questions, we could maybe even get to it asynchronously. But until the next time, hopefully this was all helpful. Thanks, everyone.